Hey, who's the new weather guy? Until my little sister pointed it out, I hadn't noticed that the faces on the news were all different that morning. They all had the same look as the presenters that we were used to. Stuffy suits, a parted hair, and plastic smiles. But I didn't recognize a single one. There was the usual colorful map of the area, but this time it showed what looked like an enormous black spiral swirling toward our town. And as much as possible, remain inside with the doors and windows locked. Close your shutters to prevent damage to windows, and when you hear sirens, take shelter in the basement. If you do not have a basement. I tuned out and pulled back the curtain. And there wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was a perfect early fall day. Sounds like a lot of fuss over nothing. My father huffed and then turned back to his coffee. My mother and sister weren't so sure. They stared transfixed at the ticker running across the bottom of the screen. School closures, business closures, canceled events. I sighed and ran my fingers over the keys in my pocket. It couldn't have happened at a worse time. Just when I most needed my family's attention to be off of me, they were about to be on high alert. I would never get out the door without a million questions about where I was going. I would have to find a good excuse, because there was no way I could tell them the truth. My girlfriend Katie and I were going to run away together. Our town was the sort of place where sex before marriage was considered a deadly sin. Heavy metal was believed to be the devil's music, and games like Dungeons and Dragons were seen as a gateway drug to Satanism. Katie and I secretly enjoyed all of those things, and our text messages proved it. 2 days before, Katie's mom had snooped through her phone and called my parents about what she had found. All of them were in agreement. If people in town got even a whiff of what Katie and I had been up to, their reputations would be ruined. So what if we were 17 and had been together for a year already? What mattered the most was public opinion. The day after our parents told us that our relationship had to end, Katie and I started making plans. My car may have been a rattling death trap, but I owned it outright. Katie had $600 in her savings account. With that, we figured we could start over in someplace better than this. Someplace where we could be together. And who knew, maybe in a few months, after their tempers had cooled down, our parents would accept us again. Or so we thought. Katie liked the idea of Chicago. It was the nearest big city to where we lived, and we could drive there in half a day if we didn't take too many breaks. During our lunch break the following day, we planned everything out. Katie's family lived out in the country, and even if she was grounded, she would still be expected to hang the sheets out to dry on Saturday morning. She could discreetly prepare a backpack with the essentials, hide it in the laundry basket, and run out to meet me when I pulled up. We had agreed on 11 o'clock. Now it was 10:30, and even though it was a 20-minute drive to Katie's house, I still hadn't found an excuse to step out the door. Although my father was older and on the heavier side, he had been a linebacker in college, and I didn't doubt that he would tackle me to the ground and take the keys by force if he suspected what I was planning. Still, Katie couldn't wait around forever. If she stood outside for too long, her parents would get suspicious, especially if they were also listening to this weird weather report. An idea struck me. "I'm gonna go put the car in the garage," I announced. "I don't want it to get damaged if there's any hail." While my little sister joked that a little hail damage might actually make my car look better, I grabbed the backpack that I had left in the closet and I slipped out the door. Seconds later, the keys were in the ignition. My heart raced as I backed out of the driveway. I couldn't believe it. Storm or no storm, Katie and I were actually doing this. I didn't look in the rearview as I turned onto the main road, but I could already imagine the scene back in the living room. My mom wondering casually what was taking me so long. Dad sitting up in his recliner, his dinosaur brain having finally put the pieces together. My little sister pointed out the window with a drama queen scream. Suddenly, none of it felt like my problem anymore. Doubts, panic, and second thoughts were circling around my brain like hungry sharks, but I was still confident that I had done the right thing. To distract myself, I rolled the windows down and turned on the radio. The message from each station was the same, more or less. Get inside, lock your doors, and shutter your windows. When you hear the sirens, take cover. The radio announcer's voice sounded uncannily identical to those of the newscasters that my family had been watching. Maybe they were all on the other channels too, whoever they were. Still, I wasn't the only one ignoring their warning. I passed plenty of cars on the way to Katie's. Most of the drivers looked as confused as I was. Where the hell was this world-ending storm that the media kept talking about? I tried to focus on what was important, getting Katie and getting out of town. Still, the further I drove, the harder it was to ignore the subtle changes in the weather. The wind picked up, bending branches and dragging dead leaves across the road. The temperature had fallen, and there was this smell in the air, but it wasn't quite like the cozy one that comes just before a rain. It reminded me more of a beach at low tide. Slimy, salty, and rotten. I cranked the windows up, switched off the radio, and tugged at my jacket. Katie's house was just ahead. Katie's parents knew what my car looked like, and there was no place to hide in the farmland surrounding their house. I had to assume that as soon as I could see their windows that they could see me, and after that it would be a race against time. The sheets were flapping in the wind when I came around the corner. Katie had to be outside already. I floored it. A red-headed figure in a black t-shirt and jean shorts was running through the fields towards the road. Katie. The rear screen door of Katie's house flew open. Katie's dad, a red-faced, overweight bald man in a tank top, stepped out onto the porch. He was shouting something, and although I couldn't hear him over the wind, the shotgun in his hands made the message clear enough. There was a deafening boom. Either his first shot missed or he was just trying to scare me, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out which. Katie hooted and dived into the passenger seat. I stepped on the gas before she had even shut the door. A minute later, Katie's dad was just a tiny hunched-over figure in the distance, bent double from the effort of chasing after us. We had made it. Or at least it felt that way for a little while. Katie kicked off her shoes and stuck her bare feet out the window. We were giggling like idiots, drunk on the moment and happy just to be alive. I guess it's no surprise that we didn't notice how few cars were on the road by then, or how no one seemed to be doing yard work or walking their pets in the neighborhoods that we passed. We were still discussing what our first move should be after we had made it to Chicago, when Katie pointed out her window and said, "What's that?" The sky was still blue above us, but a massive black shape now filled the entire horizon to our right. It looked almost like a hurricane, except that there were no other clouds around it, and we were hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. As it approached, the land beneath it disappeared into darkness, almost like it had been swallowed up. "Look out!" Katie grabbed the steering wheel and turned hard. I had gotten so caught up in staring at the sky that I had almost run us off the road. I stomped on the brake and skidded to a halt seconds before we slid into a ditch. We sat in silence for a minute, our hearts racing, neither of us wanting to admit the truth. No matter what we did now, that shadow was going to catch us. It felt like I was waking up from a dream or maybe sinking deeper into a nightmare. There wasn't a single vehicle on the 4-lane highway up ahead. Even the rest area at the exit had its lights off. Katie and I looked at each other. For the first time in a long time, I suddenly wished that I had an authority figure, a parent, a police officer, anybody to tell me what to do, to tell me what was right. I took my foot off the brake, switched on the headlights, and aimed my wheels towards the highway entrance ramp. "Ah, screw it," I shouted. "Let's drive through." Katie nodded grimly. It was what she had been thinking all along. Sooner begun, sooner done. That was what our favorite teacher, Mr. Maysfield, used to say, and it seemed to apply here. The quiet and emptiness of the road was eerie. Even the drumming of my fingers against the steering wheel seemed loud. Neither of us felt like talking any longer. We just wanted to get to the other side of that, whatever it was, as quickly as possible. I gritted my teeth and kept accelerating toward the wall of shadow ahead. As we got closer, the silence was replaced by an awful mechanical howl. The sirens. If we had been in a city or a suburb, it would have made sense for there to be storm sirens nearby. But out in the middle of nowhere, on a highway, where could the noise even be coming from? And what was it that the news anchors had said? If you hear a siren, get to a basement or the most sheltered room of your house. I was sure that it had been something like that. I had expected us to hit a deluge as soon as we drove into the darkness, but not a drop of rain was falling. The only difference was that the wind had stopped, the air was more humid, and suddenly it was as black as night. I tried to act calm and nonchalant for Katie's sake, but I was secretly praying to see another pair of headlights approaching up ahead. That way, at least, we could know that somebody else had survived whatever we were driving into. There was no one. The closest thing that I saw to a sign of life was a semi-truck pulled over on the side of the road. Its driver's side door hung open as though the driver had been too busy running for their life to close it behind them. Over 20 minutes had passed. The sirens, if that's what they were maddening. There was no end to the darkness in sight. Do you think we should go back? Katie asked. I looked in my rearview mirror. The razor-thin line of daylight behind us seemed impossibly far away. I told Katie that turning around might actually be worse, although I couldn't have said for sure why I was so sure about that. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. If there was no one around for miles in every direction, then why did I feel like I was being watched? Reluctantly, I leaned forward and craned my neck up at the abyss overhead. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe an enormous yellow eye glaring back down at me, or some horrible, hungry thing with leathery wings. But of course, there was nothing there. Katie wrapped her arm around mine, and I was grateful for her warmth. The further we drove, the darker it got, until it felt like the world beyond my headlights had ceased to exist. Apart from a pair of crashed, abandoned cars in the opposite lane, we hadn't passed a single trace of civilization. "We gotta get off the highway," I said, hating how shrill and terrified my own voice had started to sound. "It just feels too exposed." Katie finished my sentence for me and nodded. "Besides," she added, "we're almost out of gas." I glanced down at the dashboard. I had been so tense that I had barely noticed how far we had driven, or how low the orange fuel gauge bar had gotten. Fortunately, the red exit sign up ahead advertised food, lodging, and fuel. Supposedly, there was a gas station about half a mile to the left. I took us off the highway. I wasn't sure why I was feeling so uneasy about the whole thing until Katie spoke up. "Aren't those signs supposed to be blue?" she asked. And Katie was right, but if we turned around now, we might never make it to the next fuel pump. We would have to take our chances. The gas station's green and orange sign was bright, but it wasn't any brand that I had ever seen before. I pulled into the empty parking lot. The lights were on, but something felt off about their color. Some were a surgical shade of white, while others were the same dull red as the sign that we had seen on the highway. I switched off the engine and stepped outside. The asphalt crunched beneath my feet like fresh snow. There were no cigarette butts here, no discarded wrappers, no puddles of oily water. Whatever this place was, it was new. I rubbed my eyes. For some reason, I couldn't seem to read the text on the fuel pump. It was like the words were smeared or written in some language other than English. The machine beeped when I put my card in, and when I pulled the trigger on the pump handle, I could hear liquid flowing. From inside the car, Katie gave me a nervous little thumbs up sign. While the gas tank refilled, I squinted into the total night around us. Part of me was terrified of making too much noise. Another part longed to hurl a rock into the darkness just to break the awful stillness. The pump hose clicked off, making me jump. I was just putting it back when Katie scrambled out of the car shrieking. She slammed the door behind her and clung onto me like she was drowning. It was a minute or two before I could make any sense of what she was saying. Apparently something had crawled into the back seat of the car. All she would say about it was that it was about the size of a large dog and that it skittered. I looked around nervously. Since Katie had screamed, the feeling of being watched had been getting stronger. I peered into those rear windows. There wasn't much to see in the dim light, but I had a hard time believing that something so large could hide in there, much less squeeze between the cracks of the unopened door. I reached for the door handle and Katie shrieked again, begging me not to open it. I sighed, told her to step back, and I checked the back seat. After 10 minutes of searching, even Katie agreed. Apart from our 2 packs and some trash on the floor, the car was empty. There was nowhere for something so large to hide. "I know what I saw," Katie kept repeating. She stood with her arms crossed as far away from the car as she could get without entering the darkness. She nodded to the gas station and asked if I had checked the locks. I shook my head. I had been so focused on filling the tank that I hadn't even thought about food or drinks. Nervous for a reason that I couldn't explain, I approached its pristine glass doors. They slid open automatically, invitingly, but something held me back. It was the merchandise. On the surface, it seemed like the same stuff found in any convenience store: magazines, snacks, and cold drinks. Beyond that, however, everything was wrong. The labels on each item were written in that smeared-together language that wasn't quite English, and the images on the packaging were even stranger. The picture on one brightly colored bag showed a woman laughing while what looked like maggots chewed through her face. The soda bottles on the shelf beneath contained reddish sludge, and the labels showed a 7-fingered hand slowly drowning in the stuff. I was still staring when an employee popped behind the cash register. They wore a work uniform with a pattern that matched the sign outside. A visor hid their face in shadow. Something about how their head hung low beneath their elbows reminded me sickeningly of a puppet on strings. They snapped their left arm around backwards in a wave. "Can I help you?" A voice whispered hungrily. It seemed to be coming from inside my head. I took a step backward. The ground stuck to my shoe in gooey strands. It had gone mushy as though the whole place was salivating, as though Katie and I were its next meal. "Get in the car," I screamed at Katie. She looked down. Her shoes had sunk into the asphalt up to their laces. It was the only thing that could have gotten her moving. Katie reached through the driver's side window and turned the key in the ignition. The motor groaned, sputtered, and died. A syrupy, rust-colored liquid spewed out of the gas cabin from beneath the hood. The engine was dead. Whatever I had filled my tank with, it wasn't gasoline. While I pulled my hair and thought about how screwed we were, Katie yanked our backpacks out of the car and grabbed a flashlight from the trunk. She switched it on and motioned toward the darkness. It was the last place I wanted to go, but my feet were sinking deeper into the asphalt with every step. If we stayed here any longer, this place was going to eat us alive. We ran until our muscles burned and it hurt to breathe. The dirt beneath our feet finally felt solid again. The grass brushing against our legs was itchy and real. The gas station still glowed in the distance like a lure. When we paused to look back at it, I saw something crawl out of the backseat of my car and onto the roof. It reared up and stared back at us. I couldn't find words to describe it, but it was bigger than a German Shepherd, and when it moved, it skittered. The flashlight's beam was already dim, and the thing had been sitting in my trunk for ages. I had no idea how much juice its batteries might have left. If it went out completely, what the hell were we supposed to do? Just keep walking blindly into the dark until one of us got hurt, or one of the things from this so-called storm got to us. In the distance, those strange sirens continued to wail. The sound actually gave me hope. If there were sirens, there were people. And if there were people, there would be places to take shelter. All we had to do was keep moving and pray that the batteries would last. I swept the light from side to side. We seemed to be in some sort of animal pasture. There was a beaten down fence just up ahead. Unless the road had switched directions, I figured it was somewhere to our right. Let's follow the road, I suggested. We'll be more likely to find a house that way, don't you think? Katie nodded, but it was clear that she had lost her faith in me. I couldn't blame her. Every decision that I had made had led us from bad to worse. Just this morning, we had both been at home with our families and daydreaming about our future together. Now we were lost in a pitch-black field in the middle of nowhere, with no food, no water, and no idea how we were going to survive the night. It wasn't long before I caught sight of something large looming on the edge of the flashlight's beam. It was an old 2-story farmhouse, with a wide front porch and a rickety barn out back. I figured it belonged to whoever owned the fields that we had been crossing. Katie looked up at me hopefully. As ominous as the place looked, it was probably our best bet. The flashlight flickered again, and this time it didn't come back on again until I smacked it. In what was left of its light, Katie sprinted up the farmhouse steps and tried the door. Of course, it was locked. Katie knocked, but there was no response. We circled the building searching for another entrance, but the back door was bolted shut and the windows were shuttered. All except for one. The kitchen window was wide open. The flashlight was truly dying now, and apart from some cabinets and a countertop, we couldn't really make out what was on the other side. "Hello?" Katie shouted into the gloom. "Our car broke down. We're lost and hungry. Can we come inside, please?" Nobody answered. The flashlight's beam was dimmer than ever. Katie shrugged and pulled herself through the open window before I could stop her. "Hey, wait!" I shouted and then climbed through myself. Inside was an ordinary country kitchen. Flower print wallpaper, hardwood floor, and big crockery jars full of flour, salt, and sugar. On the rear wall was a half-open door leading down to the cellar. And beside it, an old woman with her back pressed against the wall and an expression of terror on her face. Katie and I lifted our hands to show that we meant no harm, but the woman didn't react. She didn't even blink. The flashlight's beam was almost non-existent, and it was only when we got closer that we understood why. Her eyes had been gouged out. From the blood splatter and the position of the knives on the floor, I figured that she had done it herself, right after looking out the window. What the hell had she seen out there? With a shiver, I closed the shutters of the kitchen window. Katie and I didn't have the time or energy to give the stranger a proper burial, not yet anyway. We stashed her corpse on the cellar steps, bolted the door, and started searching frantically for another flashlight or more batteries. Once we had found what we needed, we checked the farmhouse room by room. As far as we could tell, the old woman was the only occupant. The power was out, but when we turned on the battery-powered radio, we heard the same presenters giving the same message as before. "Lock your doors and windows, stay inside, get to the basement if possible." The repetition was maddening, and it wasn't long before I switched the radio off again. In the following quiet, we could hear fat drops of something pinging against the tin roof. It could have been rain or hail, but I doubted it. I piled some logs on the wood stove and I lit a fire. We needed the comfort of its warmth and light, even if the smoke might give us away. We dragged a mattress into the kitchen, curled up beneath a pile of blankets, and fell into a deep sleep. I wasn't sure whether the sound of scratching against the cellar door was what had awoken me or whether I had just dreamed it. The clock on the wall showed 10 in the morning, but the world outside was still dark. I heated a can of soup on what was left of the fire and poured it into 2 bowls, and then refilled our water bottles in the sink. There were some weird black flakes in it, but it tasted alright. While we ate, Katie and I talked about the storm. She thought some kind of chemical spill was causing people, including us, to hallucinate. That would explain the gas station, the weird warning sirens, and even the old woman's death. I, on the other hand, was sure that it was something worse, maybe even something that I had never seen before. When I look into that black sky, I told Katie, I think I know what the first person to see a volcano or a meteor shower must have felt. That this is so much bigger than I am, so much more powerful, and it's totally beyond my control. A whoosh of wind rattled the shutters. A low, mournful call followed it, one that almost reminded me of a whale song. What was? Katie started to ask before another gust cut her off. Branches snapped outside. A barrage of junk clattered against the walls of the farmhouse. The call, or whatever it was, sounded even closer, and it wasn't any storm siren. Whatever was swooping through the sky above made another pass, this time ripping off most of the roof shingles as it went. Katie and I huddled beneath the kitchen table, holding our ears shut against that awful sound. If that thing dived any lower, it was going to tear off the whole second story with it. The fire, I understood suddenly. I doused it with water from the sink and then scurried back to my hiding place under the table, wondering if I had been quick enough. The next call, when it came, was much further away. Whatever had attacked the farmhouse must have been larger than any creature ever before seen on Earth, but without any heat or smoke to attract it, it had moved on. For us, that meant no more heat, no more cooking, and no more light apart from what our flashlights could provide. All we could do was hold each other close and wait for the endless night to pass. I couldn't have said how much time had passed before we heard a voice outside the kitchen window. Hello? It sounded familiar, but also distorted and warped somehow, like a bad recording. Our car broke down. We're lost and hungry. Can we come inside, please? I shuddered. Those were the same words that Katie had spoken while we were trying to get inside the house for the first time. Even the knocking on the front door sounded identical at first. Moments later, the whole thing repeated itself, only this time there were multiple speakers. They talked so fast that their words all ran together, and when they knocked, it was hard enough to shake the front door on its hinges. When that didn't work, they moved on to the window shutters. Whoever or whatever they were, there were a lot of them. I thought again about what the news anchors had said. Was this what we were supposed to be hiding from in our basements? Can we come inside, please? Please, 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 please. The voices outside screeched in unison, like some kind of horrible choir. I grabbed the hatchet from beside the wood stove and unbolted the cellar door. Katie asked if the coast was clear, and I answered that it was. We were halfway down the stairs before it dawned on me. Where was the old woman's corpse? Hadn't we placed it on the stairs just a few days before? I scanned the cobwebby shelves and stacks of rusty junk, but I didn't find a single trace of her. Not until I looked up. The woman's corpse was crawling across the stairwell ceiling, held in place by dozens of black, leech-like things that squirmed from within her wrinkled hands and feet. More of them pushed through her skin, arching eagerly toward us. The largest of them were wiggling in the sockets where her eyes had been. Her mouth opened hideously wide as she vomited several hundred more of the things down onto our faces. Katie and I screamed and swatted away the rain of cold, slimy creatures, but it was useless. There were too many to be sure that we had gotten them all. and whatever was controlling the old woman's corpse didn't hesitate. It dropped from the ceiling right away, clawing at us. I took a swing with the hatchet and I got lucky. The woman's skull cracked as its blade wedged into her forehead. More of the things pushed out from the wound, but she went over backwards, crashing down the stairs. As I followed her down to finish the job, I realized that the entire cellar floor was moving. Millions of those things covered it, rising and falling like a living tide. Katie and I sprinted back upstairs, where the hammering on the walls and incoherent screeching outside were louder than ever. If the old woman lived alone, it occurred to me that she had to have had a car somewhere. And what about the rickety old barn out back? I practically dragged Katie to the second floor. We found the woman's key ring on the nightstand, switched off our flashlights, and crawled onto the roof above the kitchen. Down below, we could hear the front door snap on its hinges and something, or maybe a lot of somethings, come crashing inside. We crawled to the roof edge, shut our eyes, and let ourselves drop. As soon as my feet hit the grass, I switched on my flashlight. Just as I had expected, there was an old pickup inside of the barn. We ran for it without stopping to wonder whether it worked or if we had the right keys. There were sounds of pursuit from inside the house, but we didn't look back. We didn't want to see what was hunting us, not if we could avoid it. The engine turned over on the first try. I ducked beneath the dashboard and floored it. The tires bumped over the gravel, and something crashed against the bumper, screeched, and then scrambled off into the dark. The long driveway ended in a 2-lane country road. I turned left, still hoping that we could reach the far side of the storm. The silence was only broken by the rumbling of our stomachs. "Those things were coming in through that woman's basement floor," Katie said suddenly. "And those news reporters, weren't they telling people to stay home and take shelter in the basement? What if it was a trap? What if everyone who followed that advice is dead now except for us?" I didn't know how to answer her. All I could do was keep driving past unpowered stoplights and lockdown buildings, with no idea of what was waiting up ahead. I was so used to the road being empty that I didn't notice the man walking down it until I had nearly hit him. He was shirtless and lurching straight ahead with his back to us. Even with our headlights shining right behind him, he didn't turn back. "Don't stop, don't say anything. Just drive around him, okay?" Katie whispered. She didn't have to tell me twice. As we passed, the stranger turned towards Katie's window, almost like he could sense her pulse. His skin began to ripple and hundreds more of those leech-like things burst out of it. I stepped on the gas, never once considering that the man outside the window might not be alone. We sped straight into a group of them. Suddenly, dozens of them were clinging onto the mirrors, scrambling into the truck bed and smashing their foreheads against the windows. Katie screamed at me to go, but it wasn't that easy. Not with so many of them throwing themselves beneath the wheels to stop me. Something snapped beneath the front tires and I finally pulled free. In the red glow of the taillights, I could see the crowd snapping their broken bodies back together and continuing on as though nothing had happened. I didn't look again. And Katie and I drove in shifts, only stopping when we needed to siphon gas or forage for supplies. Once I caught a glimpse of several long-limbed loping creatures running across the road. Until then, I hadn't stopped to wonder what the so-called storm had done to people's pets, or to the wildlife. On the 5th morning, we finally spotted daylight. That razor-thin line of blue was the most beautiful thing that I had ever seen. But as we got closer, Katie's enthusiasm began to fade. "Remember the gas station?" she asked. "Remember how when we found it, we were so sure that we were going to be okay?" "What, you mean it's too good to be true?" "I don't know." Katie squeezed my hand. Let's be careful, okay?" It was a weird feeling, actually being able to see again, even if all we could make out were low, shadowy hills. There seemed to be something in the road ahead though, and before we went any further, I suggested that we pull off and take a closer look. We pulled off beside a cut in a hill, climbed up the rocky ledge, and then crawled forward on our bellies. Down below, we saw what looked like a military roadblock, although the troops in their gear didn't look like any soldiers that I had ever seen. Here on the edge of the darkness, the damage didn't seem quite so bad. I could even see a few lights shining and vehicles moving around. On a road parallel to the one that we were taking, an RV was barreling toward the checkpoint. Searchlights focused in on it. A soldier held up his hand and gestured for the occupants to stop and step out. A family of 4 slowly exited the RV with their hands in the air. The soldier ordered them to turn around, and then lit them up with a barrage of gunfire. The impact of the bullets made their bodies shake like broken toys. All 4 dropped lifelessly to the ground. Katie gripped my hand until it hurt. She must have been thinking the same thing that I was. If we had kept driving, that could have been us. Those troops had just gunned down innocent civilians. Or had they? As we watched, streams of what looked like oil oozed from the murdered family's wounds. But both of us knew better. What we were seeing was actually thousands of those black leech-like creatures squirming away from their dead hosts. I was about to suggest that we continue on foot when I saw the drones patrolling along the border of the darkness. If we approached, I was sure they would do the same thing to us that those soldiers had done to that family. Moments later, there was a buzz of activity along the roadblock. Soldiers ran back and forth. An officer perched on top of a tank shouted into a walkie-talkie, and the drones all flew to a fixed point above him. I had forgotten about the crowd that we had driven through earlier. They were coming up the road behind us, and now there were 3 times as many of them. Sensing the warm lifeblood of the soldiers up ahead, they charged. It was total chaos. They were breaking the line faster than the troops could shoot them. With the drones focused on the action down below, the border of the darkness was clear. Before Katie and I could think twice, we ran for it. Thorns cut into our legs and branches scratched against our faces, but we didn't slow down. If we didn't make it across now, we never would. In the overgrown gullies between the hills, we couldn't see which way we were going, but I told myself that it didn't matter. If we just kept moving, eventually we would find our way to someplace safe. Real daylight shone down up ahead. Beyond the trees and bushes, cars were driving along a perfectly ordinary road. People were going about their daily lives, too stressed and busy to worry much about the pillar of darkness in the sky. Like Katie and I had been at first, they were probably convinced that it was just a strange-looking storm. They had their own problems to deal with, and they had no way of knowing the truth about the horrors lurking underneath. We didn't break cover until Katie spotted a semi-truck. She smiled, brushed off her clothes, and held out her thumb. I followed behind, trying to look cleaner and calmer than I felt. The trucker put on his emergency flashers and pulled off onto the shoulder. Katie and I hurried toward the passenger side door. The trucker said that his name was Zach and said that he didn't need any explanations from us. He didn't want to know any more than we had to, and he figured that we'd probably be lying anyway. Our thanks was payment enough. We climbed inside and grateful for the silence. The darkness on the horizon slowly faded into the distance. Katie fell asleep against my arm. I didn't wake her up until Zach announced that he was stopping for a meal at an upcoming truck stop. Some warm food sounded incredible. The last thing we had eaten had been a can of soup from that old woman's pantry. The memory of her empty eyes and the squirming creatures that had erupted from her skin made my face go pale. Zach noticed and gave my shoulder a squeeze. "I don't know what happened to you two, but at least you're getting far away from it now," he said. We walked together into the truck stop restaurant. The place was packed and the smell of hot grease made my stomach rumble. All Katie and I had in the world was the money in our wallets, but we offered to pay for Zach's meal anyway. It seemed like the least we could do. A waitress came by with a platter of steak, salad, fried chicken, and french fries, and we dug in right away. I cleared my plate in minutes and was considering ordering more when I began to feel a little queasy. I wondered whether maybe I'd eaten too fast. From the look on Katie's face, she was feeling the same way. I clamped a hand over my mouth, but I was too late. I vomited all over the table. Among the sour-smelling, undigested bits of food were hundreds of those wriggling leech-like creatures. By the time I understood what I was looking at, they were already moving across the floor, headed towards the warm bodies of the other patrons. Zach screamed as one of them slithered up his face and into his eye socket. I could hear similar reactions throughout the crowded restaurant. Katie heaved as well, and when I finally dared to look, I saw more of the things dribbling out from between her lips. Disgust, shame, horror. No words could describe what we felt then. We ran from the restaurant, unable to face the nightmare that we had just created. This was exactly what the soldiers guarding the frontier of the storm had been trying to stop. We had brought something out of there with us. Sunset had turned the parking lot an ugly shade of orangish red. People ran past us, screaming, doubling over, hurrying to their cars. Most of them probably figured that they had brushed the things away before any could burrow beneath their skin. But like Katie and I in that old woman's house, most of them were probably wrong. Sirens were approaching in the distance, and Katie and I knew that we had to be gone by the time they arrived. We squeezed through a gap in a chain-link fence, cut across a drainage ditch, and then climbed back behind the dumpsters of a strip mall. There was a sports bar, a tanning salon, a tobacco shop, and a dollar store. With enough trying, I was pretty sure we'd be able to bum another ride. The real question, though, was what then? Could we outrun what was happening to our world and to ourselves? 2 days had passed since then, and I'm still not sure. But the crawling sensation beneath my skin and the thin black line on the horizon are making me doubt it.